So welcome to episode 3 of Music as a Metaphor. Music as a Metaphor. My name is Lyndol Descant, and I'll be your host today as we go through the realm of music and talk about some pretty interesting and varied subjects. Got some new background music here, sort of figuring out the right volume. So in episode 3 today, we're going to be talking about, starting with something that we didn't get to finish last week, and that's the 4 stages of learning as applied to a musical instrument. Then we're going to get into a little bit of Leonard Horowitz's research on 440 and 432. We'll also going to do a live singing, some live music for you today to this very track. And we'll talk a little bit about the production of that. And then finally, we'll end with a little bit of talk on the elitist mindset block that I see from a lot of students and from society at large. It's kind of keeping us from reaching our musical potential. So once again, my name is Lyndol Descant. I'm happy to be here today. I'm a singing pianist and a music educator for the last 20 years. But I did a U-turn in life, left my corporate job, and went back to study music as an adult. In Paris, France, mainly, but also Montreal. And it gave me some interesting perspective because I've always been a truther. I've always been seeing the world from a different perspective. So that's what I'd like to bring to you today, with hopes to inspire you to play an instrument, to listen to more music, and to get creative in whatever way you can contribute, because the creativity that we have is our power. So let's go ahead and get started for today. So this last week we talked about there being 4 stages of learning something new. And this is important for adults to understand because I picked up an instrument as an adult. Now, I'd had some training as a child, and I'd always continued singing. Singing was just something I always did. But when I picked up my piano in my early 20s again, there's a lot of psychology that you have to deal with. It's not easy to pick up an instrument. And the main thing is not, having the faith to see it through, because it's going to take a while. It's not something that overnight you're going to be where you want to be. So you have to really want it, and you have to set yourself towards a long-term journey. And on that journey, there's these stages that I've seen over and over again in adults. And so when I ran across this in Marisa Stantoro's book, Authenticity, I thought this, would be interesting to talk about. So basically, the first stage is unconscious incompetence. And this we talked about last week a little bit. It's a beginner's luck. This is actually a great place to be when I thought about it. And you maybe want to stay here as long as you can as an adult, because you really don't know how much there is to learn. You really don't know how far you are from your goal. And that's a good thing. You don't really want to know. And it's just such a joy, especially if you were like I was, where you were blocked for years and years and years. And finally you're on an instrument. Just playing one note can be the world to you. It can feel incredible. It can be wonderful. It can be so expressive. So you really want to stay in this place of unconscious incompetence. And I would say even boldly get out and do open mics or play in front of others. Like, you really don't know what you don't know at this point. And you can just be in the pure joy of music. And you want to maybe carry that as long as you can. Now, that being said, you can have some, you can run up against more seasoned musicians. And this is where I would caution seasoned musicians, and where I would caution music teachers, that you really don't want to bring somebody out of that bubble too soon, because it's a long-term journey. And the more time you spend playing, the quicker you're going to get where you want to be. And we'll talk about some of those stages coming. But I've seen far too many musicians just be like, what? Why is this musician so excited? They didn't even play anything. Like, they played one song, and they're so quick to do that. And I think that that's a poor instinct on people's part. But I myself did experience that, even from people that I really cared about and loved. They would just be like, you've been working on that's what you're playing? I mean, who cares? Like, that's nothing. And it can, as that sets in, people can bring in the next phase too quickly, which is conscious incompetence. Okay. And this is where most adult students quit in the second stage, because now you actually start becoming aware. Now, the good thing is that your understanding of music has expanded, so you sort of understand where you're trying to get to and where you want to go, and maybe you're even hearing better, so you're starting to hear more. If you've been singing out of tune or different things, you're starting to hear it more. So it's brought on by a wider knowledge base, which is a sign of progression. It's what you want. But the problem is it can be so discouraging, because now you can start to calculate and just be like, what am I doing? How am I ever going to get where I want to get? Maybe you've even been embarrassed and shamed by some other musicians or other people listening. So this is a hard phase to go through. And if you can make it through this phase, then you can get to the next phase, which will basically be the momentum to carry you forward. I'm always encouraging people to pick up an instrument as a long-term, like the rest of your life kind of companion. To me, the work that you put into an instrument, it is a joy that can give back for your whole life. But in particular with adults, I have to warn them that it takes a good 2 years at least before that momentum kicks in and it becomes a part of your identity and your life in a way that you'll never lose it. And in that first 2 years is when so many of the adults hit this phase and give up. Now, some of them yo-yo, so they'll start to realize their incompetence and they'll get frustrated and they'll put it down, but then they'll pick it back up. And even if they yo-yo through that 2 years, they'll still land in a place of momentum. But this is where most of them get discouraged and quit. There's several things that I tell adults at this phase to help them. One of them is to think in terms of it's a 2-year commitment no matter what. Even you're going to go through peaks and valleys. It's not going to be fun all the time. It's going to be very frustrating. And one of the biggest reasons is you might be thinking, I should be picking this up faster, right? When you first start in that first phase of unconscious incompetence, you have unrealistic expectations. You think you're going to learn faster. And when you don't, it's quite frustrating. But this is where I try to explain to people that as you learn music, you exponentially learn how to learn music. So the first few years take the longest to learn skills, but you will learn them as long as you don't give them up. And then as you've learned skills, now that applies to everything else that you do. So it keeps building exponentially. So by your 5th year, your muscle memory and the synapses in your brain are so well developed on music. Well, now things come in faster. So learning is always a little bit frustrating. You're always going to be reaching new levels and always having to dig deep for, when you kind of hit that new level and you're ready for a new challenge. But those challenges bust through much quicker than they do in that first 2 years. So typically, and I've seen it over and over again, typically after 2 years of even starting and stopping, but even more so when somebody has been committed, then you'll reach this new phase, the third phase or the third growth phase, which is conscious competence. Now you are aware of how hard you've worked and you can see that you're able to play things that you couldn't before. And that is what builds your confidence the most. That's what builds your joy in music the most, because I do believe most of us know how powerful we are. And so we actually love it when we see ourselves face a challenge and come through on the other side. That confidence can spill over into everything now. And you're enjoying it because it hasn't been easy. And so it's a conscious competence. You're seeing that you're able to do things. You're seeing that you're getting better. And you're conscious of the whole thing. And there's still a lot of effort being put forth. It's still something that, is you're sitting down and you have to focus and you have to put the energy forth and learning new things. There's still places you want to go. You still have to put that energy forth. But this is the point where for most people, the joy and the return on your investment is such that it will be part of your life for the rest of your life. Maybe in starts and stops. Maybe it doesn't continue to grow the level it's grown to get to this point. Maybe it plateaus and it just becomes something for you to enjoy. Or maybe you continue growing it. Either way, it's now part of who you are. There's also, this is the point where I think you lose the imposter syndrome, because there's been a lot up until this point, at least it happened with me, and I see it happen with others, feeling like I'm not really a musician, like I can never really do this. There's so many doubts that come in. Well, now at this point of conscious competence, you feel pretty confident as a musician. You know you have something to contribute to the world of music. You know you've spent that time, and so you don't feel like as much as an imposter, even if your level isn't where you'd like it to be, or you don't consider yourself a professional. Maybe you're not even sharing it with other people. But this time that you've spent has changed you, and it's become part of you. And that's the glorious part of it. It becomes almost like a secret refuge for you, whether you share it with others or not. And it builds your confidence in all areas of life. It becomes part of who you are. This instrument does, in a way that is very natural. It's very hard to explain it to somebody who it doesn't play an instrument, how much it becomes like, oh, I've always been this way. Even if, like me, you weren't playing since you were young. Maybe you gave it up for a while, or maybe you never learned, but it does become part of who you are in a way that is entwined and you'll never lose. And hopefully, as time goes on and you continue in this place, then you'll get to unconscious competence. And this is the most joyful place. This is where you don't have to expend as much effort. This is where you've done the work to build all this muscle memory and all these synapses. And this is the level of mastery. And this is where what I've found is really what you enjoy hearing from people. One of the reasons that you might go and pay money to hear somebody play music is because they're playing from this place. And now what's happening is the technique is effortless to them. And the expression, the soul, the emotion, if they're an energy worker, they're consciously, and you can think of other dimensions because your whole brain isn't going anymore to just the technique. And so now it's really that level of mastery. It seems effortless in them, and that's what we really enjoy. Now it's interesting because, being a master, what I realized can mean many different things, because you could have focused solely on one style of music, and that style of music isn't necessarily that difficult of a style of music, comparatively speaking, say to classical music or jazz, where it takes many, many, many more years to get to a level of unconscious competence or mastery. But if you've sat in that, and you've sat in that one style of music, and maybe even the same songs for a very long amount of time, maybe even just your own songs, you've only focused on your songs. Well, the interesting thing is that you do get to a place with it that becomes like beyond. It becomes some sort of portal, or it becomes a bridge, it becomes something that other people can really hear something in. And I believe it's because of that level of mastery. So keep that in mind. And many adults I have to talk with about this, you are going to have to pick your battles. When I was an adult student, I kind of, had some pretty big dreams for myself, and I love variety, and I wanted to get good at as many styles of music and as much of music as I could, which is a great goal to have for a certain amount of time. And definitely as a younger person, when you have time exploring all these different areas, it does, put tools in your toolbox, and it does lead you to be a very holistic type of musician. But there is typically a point where you're going to have to focus on one given area, and you especially can't be you have to be realistic about the idea that if you decide to be just somebody who's a jack of all trades in music and can play a lot of things, then reaching that point of mastery will take you a lot longer, and maybe will be elusive, because it really does take a lot of hours to get to this place of effortless mastery, where you're just zened out and you're just in bliss, and mistakes really aren't mistakes, because that's the level that you have. You can easily pivot. You never freak out about a mistake. You've lost a lot of your the nervousness or the fear of mistakes is gone at this point, because it's so easy to you. It just really is that easy. So we'll speak more on that another time. That's sort of opening a bridge to another topic. But I just wanted to explain this because I think psychologically helping adults pick up an instrument is a big part of what I love doing, because it's not just about the technique. Technique is part of it, but it's about having a brain that's going along with the program and understands it, and having realistic expectations and realistic timetables makes a big difference for enjoying the process. And enjoying the process makes a big difference to your progress. It really will happen so much easier for you and so much faster if these psychological blocks and these nagging voices saying, why are you doing this? You'll never get there. You know, the more that you have the tools to quiet that voice if you can't quite silence it. So that's what I'm here for, and I love sharing those type of tips. So we'll dip back into other topics like that, but for now, we're going to switch gears and go back to another topic we've been talking about these few weeks, and that is 432 versus 440, the frequency war. I'm going to make some theme music for that, right? It needs to be pretty dramatic, I think. Maybe I'll just make up something like da 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 ba ba da da ba da ba da 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 da. Wow, wow, frequency war. So what am I talking about? If you haven't been here the last few weeks, I'll get you up to speed real quick. What we're talking about is in 1939, the world standard of music was changed to 440 hertz. Hertz are what we use to measure sound waves, and A, which is above middle C, is what we use to tune our instruments in the modern times. And once we were able to measure the actual frequency through the tonometer in the early 1800s, 440 had been proposed. But there's a widespread belief in alternate communities that 440 was proposed by the Nazis as an actual weaponization of music. That actual frequency, as opposed to 440, as opposed to 444, which is 4 hertz above, or 432, which is 8 hertz below, actually is damaging to our psyches. It does not help human beings to hear music that's based in that. And you can come into music and have the best of intentions, but you're playing with a dark canvas. You're playing with a canvas that maybe has had manure spread on it, and then you're trying to paint something beautiful on top of it. Okay, that's the concept that we're talking about. And on an intuitive level, I find this concept very interesting, because I do feel like we're dealing with things on that level. Like we've been born into a world. I was born in the 70s. Anybody born, from the 50s, 60s on, we've been born into a pretty interesting situation. And most of us think that that's just normal. But as you start coming awake to things, you start recognizing that things really aren't coming up roses in a lot of different ways, and you're trying to get at the root of it. And I think that this could be a very interesting explanation for how our society has descended into the place that we are today. Now, I want to talk today specifically about Leonard Horowitz. Okay, he's somebody that I brought up on the previous episodes, as well as actually Billy Ray is the one who brought him up to me on Infinite Fringe, where if you want an intro to this topic, Billy Ray has not only Leonard Horowitz, but I myself, Lyndol Descant, speaking on there. And that's at Infinite Fringe. You can find that on all the podcasts. And he's also here on freeworld.fm. So I wanted to do some diving into his work. And I'm recognizing that his work is widely distributed as the basis for this thought pattern. And it's relatively new. It's really not, it's within the last 20 years, I believe. But let me read who he is first, okay? He is a authority in behavioral science, public health, emerging diseases, and natural healing, which is very interesting. That's the kind of expert we need, given the world that we've ended up in the last 3 years, and I guess was headed towards. And this guy could see it coming. He's a graduate of Harvard University, specializing in media persuasion for health education. He's a filmmaker, author of 16 books, and he has been speaking out about the pharmaceutical cartel, and he sees a very strong connection between that and our music, which I intuitively feel like he's correct on. He's into musical mathematics, which is a lot of what we're talking about when we get into why 444 and 432 are more harmonious. And these are things I've talked about on previous episodes, just the numbers themselves behind it. And this is what I love the most, though. I mean, listen to this. He has a mission to help fulfill humanity's divine destiny to actualize world peace and permaculture sustainability. Well, how many of us have gotten way too cynical to believe that that's even possible? And so I love that this guy firmly believes in it and is pushing 100% forward with it. And as we'll see today with his theories on 440, he's found a mechanism where he really believes that we can be empowered and turn things around. So I'm inspired by this guy. I don't know much more about him. And from this article, I will tell you, I do feel like I need to read some of his books, because some of the things that he brings forth here, while intuitively they make sense, especially if you've done reading like of the Economic Hitman or on some of the Skull and Bones and look at some of the connections and see how some of the funding works, then what he's talking about doesn't seem that out there. But unfortunately, it's really not sourced in this particular article. And in many cases, when he does source something, it's back to his own book. So in order for me to really present any of these things as evidence, I'd have to do more into his books and see what kind of sourcing he has for it. But still, I think it's a very powerful thesis that he is putting forward here, and one that should not be dismissed as too far out there by any stretch of the words if you've done any amount of research yourself into how things operate these days. So what he's saying is, one of the things that he's saying that I think is really, really interesting is that 440 frequency, while this isn't a smoking gun, the timing was impeccable that it came out in 1939, right before World War II really hit. Okay. So I think that's a good point, because it's debatable, you know, when you get into sort of fifth dimensional consciousness, if anything here is really a coincidence, right? Now, where it comes from or why or who, that's a different story. But was it a divine thing? But it is interesting that 440, which is proposed to be sort of a weaponization of music, that it puts people in an aggressive mindset, that it sets a disharmony in people, that it puts them in a state that makes them more vulnerable to suggestion because their own equilibriums are off. Well, that's interesting to do right before you want to kick off a world war, or let's even back up a little bit from that, just saying a world war is about to kick off. Okay. Now he's saying that Goebbels, the minister of propaganda of the Nazis, was the one who really pushed this. But once again, I'm not seeing any specific evidence. What is evident is that in 1939, it was adopted by the British, and not necessarily by the British, but they had a forum of which there was a vote, 3 Germans there. Now, were they pushing it? This is the part that I'm still, looking into. But what is interesting that I realize now is that 440 was proposed for broadcasting as well from BBC. Okay. And there are broadcasting reasons. Now, last week we talked about 440 being proposed because as music was being played in the 1800s, which is when we saw 440 starting to be proposed, it created a bigger sound for these bigger rooms rather than the little chamber music, but also that it was better for singers because as that pitch was being pushed up to 450, which can still be pushed up all the way to 450, it was harder on the singers. So 440 was sort of a middle ground of giving a brighter, bigger sound by pushing the frequency up, but it was also better for the singers. Well, what's interesting is that in Britain at the time, 439 hertz was what was being used. And when you look into the mathematics of using the broadcasting, it does speak to 440 being an interesting choice. Okay, you could kind of see it. Well, this is what it is. The BBC tuning note is derived from an oscillator controlled by a piezoelectric crystal that vibrates with a frequency of 1 million hertz. This is reduced to a frequency of 1000 hertz by electronic dividers. It is then multiplied by 11, divided by 25, so producing the required 440 hertz. As 439 is a prime number, it could not be broadcast by means such as this. So if you're at 439 and then you're like, oh, it won't work for this particular mathematical configuration that we need based on the technology at the time, then just push it up 440. So that is another good reason that has not nefarious per se. But I just want to present those cases because I think it's important to see all sides of the situation and not just focus, even if intuitively it does feel like the coincidence of it. And Horowitz is definitely pushing that it was not a coincidence, right? That was just an excuse. And these excuses are coming from, in his opinion, the Rockefeller Foundation. Okay, he's seeing that the Nazis were actually being used by the Rockefellers. Okay, so he's coming all the way behind it with some pretty nefarious notions. And he's citing a lot of the time Tobias, James Tobias, he wrote an article in 2009 called Composing for Media from the Rockefeller archives. And he's saying that there was a lot of funding happening before this time, before 1939, that was all about watching audiences, seeing their reaction from musical cues, right? This is when they were beginning to do this research. Now, I need to look into James Tobias myself and do more research, but still there's a lot of jumping to conclusions from Mr. Horowitz here. And I'm not saying he's wrong, but I'm just saying I'm trying to have a very tempered discussion about this right now, because I think it's important in the world that we live in that we are careful to not spread misinformation based on our intuition. Our intuition can be guiding us, but our intuition can be a broad strokes, right? So this could be the right direction, but if we don't have if we're pushing something as fact when it's not, then we're going to discredit the whole thing. So that's why I'm careful here. It's not to down Mr. Horowitz's work. It's just to say that from my perspective, I haven't seen the evidence yet. Now, in his article, one of the things he says is that the Rockefeller Foundation, actually, this is from Tobias. He's saying Tobias concluded this, that the Rockefeller Foundation's careful project management and coordination contribute to the materialistic versus metaphysical industrialization of music in the media. Okay, let me say that again. Materialistic versus metaphysical industrialization. Well, that has been definitely a movement in our time. And one of the things I've had the hardest time personally with, because I've never quite been bought into the five senses materialist view, probably because I'm sensitive and I have, sort of intuition, and I've never lost track with it. So even though for a long time I let other people sort of gaslight me and think that I was wrong and they were right, in reality, the materialistic view, in my perspective, is limited and ridiculous, especially given that humans have never thought this way. It's been largely promoted through scientism, and I've seen enough proof that there has been people pushing us this direction. So I think that's an interesting notion, that music sort of used to be far more spiritual and understanding. And I can see that with some of the books that I'm reading from like the turn of the century. Some books that I'll talk about a little bit more that almost talk about the voice being part of your etheric body, and they used methods for that. And so for them, trying to sing from just a purely materialistic place is like half your voice. Like it's not really a full voice. And they could see that happening and spoke to it at the turn of the century. These are some Rudolf Steiner students, so still a little bit out of the box type of thinkers, but I tend to sort of think that too, especially when you look at the subject of most of our music. Like jazz, for example, I love jazz music, but there's really only a few that sing to metaphysics, like Nature Boy. And then you have people like Coltrane who are playing it in the notes. But as far as the actual subject matter of the songs, they're almost all just about romantic love or heartbreak or very quaint, fun things, but just basically, the 3D world. So I think that's interesting. Now, going forward a little bit, another thing that he talks about is just the military-industrial complex, and this idea that this research of weaponizing music, it was being funded through investment banking, and it was sort of being promoted through investment banking, and he has a lot of good ties for that. Intensive research into the military and commercial value of compelling herd behavior with music to induce stress, promote disease, suppress spirituality has enabled the world's wealthiest people to exercise cultural control through programming. So I think a lot of us are waking up to that in the music industry right now. It's something that, it's just within the last 10 years is becoming more and more obvious, I think. Not to everyone, I understand that, but to the people listening to this podcast, probably that's becoming evident to you. And if not, maybe it's a viewpoint at least that you can entertain, whereas it would have seemed crazy and silly like 20, 30 years ago. So let me see here. Yeah. One thing I want to mention is that there's this idea of the 3, 6, and 9 as being represented by a set of natural harmonics mathematically linked to pi in the Fibonacci series. And I want to bring that up because that's why 440 is also not great, right? And he talks about this, the mathematics of it, and you can get really in depth with this. And I'm not going to here, but I just want to mention it because I haven't talked about this aspect. That 3, 6, and 9 can sort of be seen by people that are kind of genius level. They can be seen as, sort of keys to unlocking things, like unlocking power, harnessing more of the natural powers that we have around us, right? So Tesla was big into these numbers. He used a lot of them in his inventions. So we're getting into spiritual science. We're not, we're talking about spiritual things, but we're talking where they intersect with this reality. And so, music that has these numbers, has these derivatives in it, they maybe can lock us into our spirituality in a more tangible way. Whereas right now, because of the materiality that we've been entrained with, ever since birth and in the music and in media and been bombarded from every direction, it's disempowered us. It's belittled us. It's made us think that we're just these bodies, when in reality, and that spirituality is some, out there notion that it's intangible and we can't really understand it or touch it. So why deal with it? You have just here and now, you got to deal with your day to day. That we've been purposely talked out of that, because in that connection, with our higher self, our soul, what seems intangible to us, but maybe in the past was more tangible, this is where our true power is, right? This is where we don't fall for the programming. This is where we recognize that, whatever sort of world we're living in, that it's not bigger. It can't enslave us, basically, because we're connected to something that's beyond that, because this enslavement that is happening is based in materialism, right? Or it's for people that are based in materialism. So, I just want to, we'll talk more about Horowitz, but that's sort of the notes. The big takeaways from him are just that it's Rockefeller behind everything, and that he feels like he has evidence for it that I'm still going through. But certainly, they were certainly involved with some research that led to thought leaders, that led to major influences around this time period. And also the fact that at this time period was when the timing of moving to 440. Whoever proposed it, the timing is impeccable based on where World War II starting and where we've gone since then. But the thing that I want to say, that he says that I think is really inspiring, is that, and I'm going to read this directly from his article, many musicians, mathematicians, physicians, physicists, even geneticists now celebrate the emergence of the truth about 440 hertz, which was his big one. He preferred that over 432 as an apparent carrier wave of love, broadcasting universality from the heart of the electromagnetic energy matrix. The vast majority of objective investigators now view these revelations, is that the right word? Revelations, sorry. Now view these revelations as an opportunity to rediscover our spiritual roots in music in accordance with accelerating spiritual renaissance. The emergence of this knowledge is perfectly timed to remedy otherwise impossible problems imposed on the world by unelected leaders of economic and geopolitical chaos. So I love how this guy was really focused on peace and, solutions. And so many people, we feel so disillusioned and so cynical about what can really be done given what's stacked against us. Let's put it that way. And but intuitively, I've always felt that picking up an instrument and playing it is, is one of the best ways that you can contribute and help, if you want to help. And tuning to these other frequencies now, it makes even more sense, right? Because it really is a frequency war. So keeping your own frequency high by playing a music instrument, playing for other people, even if it's just a few people, it doesn't matter the number, it spreads, right? Because we're talking about frequency. And I think that he's proposing the same thing here. I think he's proposing that there is a growing number of people who are picking up on this, and then that if we all start tuning into this frequency, I've heard this before too, that negative frequency, since it's lower, has to be greater in quantity, whereas higher frequency is being finer and coming from a place like a source code place, you don't need as much, and it's so much more powerful. So I love that he's sort of come to that conclusion. He says, thus, musicians, vocalists, audiences are urged to discuss these findings, reject the militarization of music that has been secretly administered, retune instruments, voices, and ears to frequencies most sustaining and healing, restoring integrity to the performing arts and sciences. This way will impact populations most beneficially. So it's taking back music. It's exactly what I've already been kind of feeling. Taking back music, right? For love. And it's entirely possible. So he has a lot more information about this on there if you're interested in it. He's saying musician and vocalist are the live stream of the music industry and humanity's last hope for physical salvation and divine human connection. The spiritual musical portals through which planetary rebirth and harmonization is destined await your vision and activism. So here I am, man. I didn't even read this guy's stuff and I was already on the same page. So that's one of the reasons why I trust my intuition, and I do actually so far really resonate with his research and his conclusions. But as I said, as far as the specifics of the evidence, this is something I'll be doing more research into. Happy to present here, and I welcome you to do the same. So yes, let's switch gears again, and I need a sip of water. So let's talk about the intro music. So I do a lot of my own producing. I use Logic Pro, and I do a lot of my own songs and my own producing, but then oftentimes I'll do the bare bones and then bring in a producer on top of that. Just depends on the songs, what I want to do. I write way too many songs for my budget right now to have other people produce, and I actually don't mind producing. I also work for some nonprofits composing personalized songs for ill children. So I've gotten decent enough at my production, and it's something that I'd like to get better at. But I wanted to share a little bit of that here, because I think part of empowering and taking back the music is to learn how to produce music. It's just part of it. So what I've done today is I've started a new song that I thought I would use here. It's a song that has just come on my radar. I heard Enya play it a really long time ago, but I didn't realize that it was actually an old hymn. And it's just, the words have been exactly what I want to sing. And this is part of how I pick songs that I'm working on when I'm not, having commissioned work, where I don't have a choice. When it's songs that I'm choosing, then I tend to pick things that I resonate emotionally, that I really enjoy singing. And when I do that, I find that working on it becomes a joy, it becomes a meditation, it becomes a prayer, and it becomes that type of spiritual warfare where I'm using even my music practices to put music out there that's coming from a loving vibe. And, love can mean a lot of different things. So sometimes it's about expressing anger or expressing certain thoughts, but I've always been a songwriter and somebody who likes playing covers, because there's times when people just express things in a song where there's no way I could do it better. And this song is one of those. And it was written a long time ago, which always gives me comfort, because it's so easy to get caught up in the sign of our times and think that things have never been this hard or never been this bad. It certainly feels that way at times. Even today, really. But people have, always been taken to the brink of challenges, and that's where our spirituality can bring us through. And that's what this song is about. So what I did was I laid down the piano tracks for this using a metronome, and I plan to layer in more instrumentation as well as sing sing the song, but so it's just the piano track, and that's what you heard as my intro. So what I'm going to do is sing live for you right now. I've been working on it. I'm going to an open mic after this. So I want to sing. I want to bring more live music to this show. So today we're going to do that. And also because next week we're going to talk a little bit more about the human voice and about, I am a voice teacher as well. I teach a lot of voice, and I want to share some of the things I've learned. And in particular, we're going to talk about voice dysmorphia. So singing today will kind of get us started down that road of talking about the voice. So here we go. This song is called How Can I Keep From Singing? Okay, can you hear it from my end? Hopefully you can hear it from your end. And here we go. My life goes on in an endless song. Above the earth's lamentation, I hear the real though far of him. That hails a new creation through all the turmoil and the strife. I hear its music ringing, it sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? While though the tempest loudly roars, I hear the truth it liveth, and though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth, no storm can shake my inmost calm. While to that rock I'm clinging, since love is Lord of heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble in their fear, and hear their death knell ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? In prison cells and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging, when friends by shame are undefiled. How can I keep from singing? I lift my eyes and the cloud grows thin. I see the blue above it, day by day my pathway smooth. Since I first learned to love it, the peace of Christ makes forever my heart. Fountain ever springing, all things are mine since I am his. How can I keep from singing? 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 Okay. So I was going to fade that out, but I accidentally just hit it. So in my produced recording, that's going to fade out. I thought it was interesting to sort of do an infinite, like I just keep singing, and then it fades out. So yeah, that's this song. This is an old hymnal, and the words for me are just right. In particular, I love the analogy of music, and that's one of the reasons why I was wanting to use this as a theme song, because it's saying, my life goes on in an endless song above the earth's lamentations. So that's sort of that idea to me of like being in the world but not of the world, like being able to live in a place where the world doesn't bring you down, the earth's lamentations, and you're in this endless song, this endless love, this endless glory. You hear the real though far off hymn, real though far off. I think that's an interesting metaphor that hails a new creation. And many of us have understood this idea that in the beginning there was the Word, right? And the idea that that vibration and sound are what create this world. There's a lot of physics, that sort of string theory that sort of promotes this idea that in a way this world is being created by sound. Through all the turmoil and the strife, I hear its music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? So this is the most beautiful way to describe how you can use music, not only as a metaphor to understand a state of being where you're in this world, but you're actually love in this world, right? Somehow you're here, but you're connected with your soul and you hear the music. The music is constantly there, even though it says at times it's far off, right? And it's not a bliss in any. It's not like they're in heaven at this point. They're in this world with references to turmoil and strife and lamentation. So then we get into the second verse, and this gets more into, I think, comfort when you're really experiencing the tough times in life, which has been the case for many of us. So more recently, I should say. So although the tempest loudly roars, I hear the truth it liveth. So once again, it's attuning our minds to keeping our sights on the truth and this music, this higher vibration, even though we're at the same time accepting the tribulations. The tempest loudly roar is that metaphor for, being in a tricky situation. And though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth. Right? So in those really dark moments that can just feel absolutely hopeless, you can still reach for the music. You can still listen for the music. Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? So yeah, this is to motivate us, to motivate myself as I sing this. This reminds me it is a mantra, right? I can sing this when I'm at my darkest moments. If I have the discipline, if I have the willpower to sing this song, it can break through that darkness and lately this idea of a rock that I'm clinging to has been very, very helpful to ground me, to keep me steady as I sort of feel dashed about with different things going on. And how can I keep from singing? Well, that is coming back to a state of gratitude, right? Coming back to being connected with your joy, even in the midst of turmoil. So at this point, I do a key change. I step up, as we then say, one that feels good to me because it's a little bit about justice. When tyrants tremble in their fear and hear their death knell ringing, right? It's really easy to get caught up in the feeling that the bad guys always win and that there's no justice in this world. Very easy to think that way, but it's not true, right? If we had the perspective of, could zoom out, then I do believe that justice is always served. And especially when you read the Old Testament, things always come right round in one way or another. When friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? And that is something that I found comfort in, because it is so hard to have friends and family suffering. It is so difficult to see that. It is so difficult to see suffering in general, but in particular with your friends. You just want your friends to do well, right? So when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? So that's just this, puts a wonderful image in your mind, brightens your mind up with the idea that your friends are rejoicing. In prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. But when it says this, then it makes me wonder if we're talking about persecuted people, right? That even in their prison cell and their dungeon vile, or maybe it's a metaphor for really what it's like living in the earth right now, what it can feel like being in a frequency. If their frequency has been lowered, if they're in suffering, that it is like a prison, right? Our thoughts to them are winging. So our love, our high thoughts are getting to them anyways, if by the wings of the birds, right? When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? That almost makes me want to cry when I think of that one, because shame is such a curse on so many of us here at this time. It's such part of our programming. We have reason to feel shame in many ways, but how can we get past it, right? When friends by shame are undefiled, how can we transcend that? How can I keep from singing? That's my wish. That's what I'm singing for. So the last verse, I do another key change, and this is to step it up yet again. Shift it again. I lift my eyes and the clouds grow thin. I see the blue above it. And day by day, this pathway smooth since first I learned to love it. So I think that that's that alchemical process of learning to accept and love whatever you have, that it smooths your path. Here as my theme song, because I think it perfectly demonstrates how music can be a metaphor for so many things and can bring us back into who we are, into our power. And it is the best thing that I know to do, because I'm helpless, and many times I'm just a girl over here. I've got my own troubles. I'm nobody perfect. I'm nobody in a position to be telling people what to do. But I do believe that I need to contribute what I can. And this song perfectly encapsulates what I intend to do, or, what I will move forward with, in faith that my brothers and sisters are doing the same thing, and hoping to empower them and lock arms with them as we move forward. So that being said, it looks like I've run out of time to talk about our last subject, which is elitism in music. And it just brings to the idea that music is a power, it is a right, it is a skill that all of us deserve, and that in many ways we've been talked out of it by a mind virus. So I'll speak to that. That'll be the start of the topic next week. We'll dip into more on 432 as I continue to do more research on this, 432, 440, and 444. But in the meantime, you can catch me on YouTube, where I'm doing a weekly video designed to inspire and uplift you. This last week I did country roads, just because I was doing a road trip and was feeling that country vibe, because we've got rodeo here in Texas now. It's that time of year. So I got some great footage out in Texas this last weekend. So don't know yet what I'll be sharing for my Friday night video, but that That premieres 8 p.m. Eastern on my YouTube. Please subscribe and like there. I'm also going to be releasing another article this week on my Substack under my name as well. And that will be about voice dysmorphia, which is another topic that we'll be getting into next week, as I feel like many, many, many people suffer from voice dysmorphia, which you can imagine is similar to body dysmorphia. So if you can't wait till next week to delve into that topic, check out my Substack this week. And as always, you can go to my website, which is probably the easiest to find. It's www.lyndol.com. And there it has links to my YouTube, my Substack. I put my blog up there as well. You can see performances that I have coming up and get in touch with me. I always am offering a free 45-minute session online Zoom for anybody who's interested in music, interested in unblocking your creativity, or would just like to have a discussion with me. I love connecting with like-minded people, and I offer this to people as a way. If you feel called to do it, please. You don't even have to know why. If you feel called to do it, get in touch. You can do that through my website as well. That's Lyndol, LYNDOL.com. And finally, for social media, I'm active on Instagram and Twitter. So there you can sort of keep track of me, like and subscribe, follow, etc. I'll be honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of social media, but I do like using it to try to connect. I felt really alone in the world before I started being brave enough to be on social media, listening to others online. So let's take back not only music, but the internet for love, for uplifting vibes, for bringing out the best in each other and reminding each other that there is something beyond what we're experiencing, that we can get in tune with our souls, and that music is a wonderful tool. Whether you're listening to music, whether you feel inspired to pick up a music, whether you're already a seasoned musician, it's just about inspiring that connection with something greater to bring and portal in love back into this world, because we need it desperately, desperately, right? So we'll talk more next week about the voice. I wanted to mention as well that was, you don't have to be perfect, right? Whatever it is that you want to do out there, that's my last thought for the day. Recognize when you're getting that perfectionism paralysis, that you're not going forward with things that your intuition and your soul is calling you to do because you think you have to be perfect. That is another program. It'll stop you in your tracks and it will withhold your gifts from the world. So I hope I inspired that today with my imperfect version of how can I keep from singing. And we'll talk more.